Hey everybody, it's Dak here from the Ed Boys, and welcome to my Brutal Black Dragon Guide. Brutal Black Dragons are a Slayer monster, which makes some pretty good cash and overall are not very difficult to kill. In this guide, I'm going to start with the requirements to fight the dragons. Afterwards, we'll talk about what gear to wear and what to bring in your inventory. Then we'll talk about traveling to and from the dragons, followed up by the actual fighting of the dragons, and finally the best part, the loot. Brutal Black Dragons don't have very high requirements. You do need 77 Slayer to fight them though. This was not the case when they were first released, but without this requirement, they were a little overpowered, plus the rooms are now not nearly as crowded as they used to be, which is really nice. I suggest 80 plus range to fight these dragons, though I would say in any PVM situations, if you're serious about making good money here, then the higher the better. For example, if you're watching this guide because you're trying to make a Brutal Black Dragon alt, I wouldn't bring that account here unless you're like 90 plus, or the kills are going to be kind of slow, and your money per hour is not going to be nearly as good. If you're just on a Black Dragon task, and you are looking to get some kills, 80 is going to get the job done though. This is a range guide, but if you're planning on using melee, a stab weapon would do best for melee damage, and I would suggest 80 plus in your melee stats. I don't really suggest meleeing Brutal Black Dragons, but again, it is an option. Here's a look at the gear that I bring with me. We'll discuss replacements if you can't get certain pieces. Void armor doesn't take too long to grind out, especially when you compare it to affording Arma, and it's the best offensive range gear in here, as long as I believe you're 92 plus range. But again, you should be getting your range level up, and the higher, the better. If you refuse to go for Void, Arma or Carol's gear will be a fine replacement, and for your gloves, the best option is Barrow's gloves. Otherwise, Black D'hide armor is always a viable option too. The best weapon in here is a T-bow, but you'll notice that I'm using a Dragon Hunter crossbow since I don't quite have those funds. If you can't afford a crossbow, then you should use a blowpipe in here. Dragon darts are a reasonable option if you have an assembler. If you're just using an accumulator, I would stick to Addy darts, and overall, the Dragon darts aren't really that necessary. Addy darts will be fine. For your shield slot, if you do bring a crossbow, your best option is a Twisted Buckler. You don't need an anti-dragon shield of any kind since you should be praying mage, and you just bring regular anti-fires, you'll negate all fire damage. If you can't afford the Twisted Buckler, other good range shields would include an Odium Ward or a Book of Law. In your cape slot, as mentioned before, an Ava's Assembler is your best option. After that, an accumulator would get the job done though. Ammo-wise, if you're using a Dragon Hunter crossbow, I would bring Diamond Bolts Enchanted, but for a T-bow, of course you should use Dragon Arrows, and if you're using a blowpipe, you can just bring a Blessing for your extra prayer bonus. The best range necklace is a Necklace of Anguish. A Fury is a fine replacement, and if you're just about broke, you could work with a Glory. You probably won't be broke for very long, at least to the point that you couldn't afford a Fury if you're camping Brutal Blacks, though. The best boots are Pegasians, followed by Ranger boots, though if you can afford Rangers, you can probably afford Pegasians because they're about the same price. God D'hide boots are a fine replacement, though, if those are too expensive. For your ring, an Archer's ring is really the only one that makes any difference, and you should definitely imbue it too. Very worth. Your inventory is actually very simple. You'll be bringing a ranging potion and an anti-fire potion for hopefully obvious reasons. Do bring an extended anti-fire potion if you don't want to have to sip it nearly as often. It'll last for 12 minutes. I bring 3 restores with me, though if you flick your prayers, you would obviously use a lot less prayer. And there is an altar pretty close by that we will discuss when we get into the trip. For teleports, I use a Xeric's Talisman because it's the only reasonable teleport there in my opinion. And if you manage 77 Slayer, you really shouldn't have an issue getting the Talisman. I use my Max Cape for home teleports, so if you don't have one, you can just bring some house teletabs too. The Max Cape also works as a Holy Wrench. You could bring a Holy Wrench with you so that you get a few more prayer points from your prayer potions. Wouldn't make too much difference per trip, but overall you'll use less prayer potions. Here's a map showing the Xeric's Inferno teleport and the shortcut to the Brutal Black Dragons area of the catacombs. If you've not unlocked that shortcut, here's a quick look at the run from the center of the catacombs all the way to the Brutal Black Dragons. All you have to do is climb up the rope once to unlock the shortcut from the outside. Let's look at what a typical trip looks like. First of all, if you teleport to the Xeric's Inferno, on the way to the shortcut, here's where that altar is. If you want to use this to restore your prayer points, if you didn't have to go to the house between runs for any reason. Sometimes for me, I AFK too much and take too much damage in here, so I do just end up healing up my house anyway. It doesn't really matter. Occasionally you will find this place kind of packed and you will have to hop, but overall, really all you have to do is turn your quick prayers on to Protect from Mage, whatever your best offensive range prayer is, hopefully Rigor, but if not, Eagle Eye. And then of course Preserve is a little bit nice to have. Sip your ranging potion, sip your anti-fire potion. Just make sure that you're standing far away enough that you won't take a melee hit. At this point, there's not any attacks that can damage you. The only reason you should take damage is if another dragon happens to use a melee attack on you right as you were to kill a dragon, like if it aggroed you and it was close enough to use a melee attack, or if you AFK'd enough and you let either your anti-fire potion or your protect from magic or your prayer points in general run out. There's really not much strategy to this. Some people don't pick up all the loot, for example the bones and the hides. I'm too much of a loot tab fiend, and it doesn't make a huge difference in terms of bank trips with the Xeric's Inferno teleport, so I just go for all the loot anyways. On the note of loot, let's just jump right into the loot. There isn't that many special drops that Brutal Black Dragons have. It can drop a Draconic Visage at the 1 in 10k rate, which is kind of nice. And because in the Catacombs you could get Ancient Shards and Dark Totem pieces from here, which is kind of nice to grind out overall. If you're doing this on an alt, maybe that doesn't make a big deal because they're untradeable. But even Scotizo kills on an alt could add up to a little bit of extra cash. For me, the Arclight charges are really nice to get from it on my main. The overall other loot is kind of good. You'll get a lot of rune items in here. One of the bigger ones you like to see are the Dragon Dart tips because it's like 150k and it's an uncommon drop. I average about 1.2 to 1.4 mil an hour in loot, which profit-wise is more like 1 to 1.2 mil profit an hour. I do AFK these a lot, so sometimes a little bit slower kill-wise, so it definitely helps if you are focusing in, but for an AFK moneymaker, this is one of, if not the best in the game. Clearly, if you have lower levels or lower gear, you're not going to be getting this much money, but you can still make some really good profit here. If you still have any questions on how to kill Brutal Black Dragons, please let me know in the comments section below. That is going to wrap up this Brutal Black Dragon guide, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed or got some useful information, and best of luck on your Brutal Black Dragon grind.